At universities across the country, professors are noticing a problem. Students aren't reading books. And yes, this is happening even at top-tier colleges and universities. Take one required class at Columbia, for example. Students are often assigned to read roughly a book per week, but in the past few years, many have started telling their professors they just can't manage it. One student even said she'd never been asked to read an entire book before. This is part of a bigger trend. People just aren't reading anymore. That includes both men and women, people with degrees and people without them. So what's going on? It turns out there are several pieces to this puzzle, but it all starts with how we teach kids to read. For a long time, reading was taught in a specific way known as phonics. Phonics starts with individual sounds, then builds up to more complex combinations, and eventually full words. When a student saw a word they didn't know, they were told to sound it out. But around the 1960s, a different approach to reading started gaining popularity. It was called whole language learning. In this method, and similar approaches like balanced literacy, kids were encouraged to recognize whole words rather than break them down. A technique called 3-cueing was used, where students guessed the meaning of words based on context. The whole idea was pitched as natural and organic. The belief was that children had an innate ability to learn to read, and that if we gave them the right environment plus a few basic tools, they'd figure it out on their own. You wouldn't need to bore them with things like phonics. It's a romantic idea, right? The notion that kids can just absorb reading like they do speech. It makes learning feel like an art, not a science. But here's the problem. It didn't work. In countries that adopted whole language learning, like the US, Canada, the UK, New Zealand, and Australia, literacy rates declined. More and more students weren't able to read at grade level. It was a widespread failure across multiple education systems. And if we're trying to understand why people aren't reading anymore, this has to be a big part of it. If you were never properly taught how to read, it's not going to feel fun or easy. It'll feel hard, like work. And when something feels like work, most people stop doing it in their free time. Now, to be clear, whole language learning and balanced literacy were never without critics. Even though they were adopted widely, there was constant pushback. This ongoing debate became known as the reading wars. In some places, it was even considered the most heated topic in politics. Reporters and scientists have been documenting the downsides of whole language learning for years. And interestingly, the COVID-19 pandemic may end up being a turning point. With kids learning at home during lockdowns, many parents got a first-hand look at how ineffective these methods really were. That created pressure and political will to change things. Now, more states and countries are reintroducing phonics into their reading curriculums. Some elements of the whole language approach might still stick around, but at least kids are starting to learn those core building blocks again. The ones that research suggests actually help. And maybe that shift will lead to a future where more people pick up books for fun again. But for students who never learned phonics in the first place, the damage may already be done. And honestly, it's not clear how to undo that. This is speculation, but I'd guess that students who make it into a place like Columbia probably can read at grade level. Still, they're telling professors they don't feel capable of finishing a book in a week. And keep in mind, these are full-time students. Their main job is to study. They've got time, which just goes to show how deeply rooted the effects of whole language learning might be. Learning methods alone don't fully explain why fewer people are reading, but part of the answer still comes from how kids were taught in school, especially when it comes to education reforms. In the US, the most well-known examples are No Child Left Behind and Common Core. Other countries have their own systems, but I'm focusing on the US here. These education reforms emphasize two major things: informational texts and standardized testing. When students were being taught how to engage with written material, they were mostly learning how to pull information from it. Some even argued that books were outdated and that schools should focus on teaching kids how to read the kinds of texts they'd actually encounter in real life, things like articles and web pages. So, for classwork, a student might be given a short passage from a longer work and then asked to analyze the author's argument, identify the evidence, or point out the thesis. And this shift happened even in English classes. classes that traditionally focused on reading longer, more challenging books. So instead of learning how to analyze themes, symbolism, or practice close reading, students were mostly being trained to extract key info from short passages. But those older reading practices, like deep analysis and close reading, they helped build something important: reading stamina. When a student who technically can read says they can't finish a book in a week, it's probably because they never developed that stamina. In fact, many professors, even middle and high school teachers, say that reading stamina has been steadily declining for years. If you want to build it, one of the best ways is simply to sit and read. Read books. Try to see how many pages you can get through before you need a break. But more and more students aren't being given those chances, not in class and not even in homework. In one survey, just 17% of teachers said they were primarily using full-length books. So when we look at students in elite colleges, or really any college game, saying they can't finish a book, this is probably the bigger reason why. It's not just about whole language learning anymore. These students got into some of the best schools in the world, but they weren't taught how to be great readers. They were trained to be great test takers. So when they arrive in college and are suddenly assigned full books, they struggle because reading a book is a different skill entirely. So much of their high school education was focused on prepping for standardized tests, things like the SAT or ACT. And if you're trying to ace those tests, you focus on reading short passages, answering multiple choice questions, and maybe writing a 5-paragraph essay. You're not being asked to unpack themes in Tolstoy or Dostoevsky. You're not reading Dickens cover to cover. So now, when these students hit a required college course that focuses on major works in the Western literary tradition, it might be the first time they're facing those kinds of books. And it's tough, simply because they're not used to it. So when we zoom out and look at the bigger picture, some students never learned how to read properly because of things like whole language learning. Others never learned how to read books because of the focus on standardized testing. But if we're trying to understand why people in general, not just students, have stopped reading for fun or just stopped reading altogether, there's one more thing we need to talk about: phones. Here's something that gets left out of a lot of these conversations. Many people actually are reading a lot every day. They're just not reading books. If you spend time scrolling through YouTube or Twitter, now X, you're taking in a constant flood of text, more than most people in history would have encountered in a week or even a month. TikTok might be the most addictive of these platforms, and almost every video has captions burned in. So whether you realize it or not, you're reading constantly. Even when you're driving, you're seeing signs, billboards, ads. The world demands your attention through words. It just doesn't give you the space to read a book. Now, this is my backyard. Sometimes I come out here, bring a book, and try to get some reading done. It's quiet, peaceful, one of my favorite places. I might start reading, feel good about it, and then, just a few seconds later, this thing wants my attention, holds up phone. So if I want to actually get through a book, I need to be disciplined. I have to make the choice to leave my phone inside, somewhere it can't distract me. Now imagine you're a college student who's never read a full book in a week, maybe not even a difficult or lengthy book ever. And suddenly your professor says, "Hey, I want you to read the Iliad by Homer this week." Let's say you're a good sport. You head back to your dorm, you pick up the book, and you tell yourself, "I'm actually going to do this." But now, think about everything around you that's ready to distract you. Your roommates, your phone, your laptop, basically anything with a screen is right there, offering a faster, easier kind of stimulation. Because let's be honest, even if you genuinely enjoy reading, compared to almost everything else you could do, reading feels boring. It's the opposite of what we're used to. This constant, overstimulated, fast-paced way of living. That's why some schools, middle schools, high schools, have started banning smartphones from classrooms. And honestly, my first reaction is, what took so long? Of course, students can't focus or read deeply if their attention is being hijacked every 5 seconds by a phone. So not only have we failed many students by not teaching them how to read properly, we've also built a world that makes it nearly impossible to focus, especially on something as slow and thoughtful as a book. When adults talk about why they don't read anymore, they usually give one of 3 reasons. They say they don't have time, they say they can't focus, or they blame social media. And honestly, I think all three of those are connected. The feeling that we don't have time, the constant inability to focus, those are symptoms of a world shaped by social media and other forms of quick, easy entertainment. I often try to read before bed, but sometimes I tell myself, let me just check my phone real quick before I start. And then suddenly, an hour has passed. I have been scrolling without even noticing. Time flows differently when I'm on my phone compared to when I'm trying to read something challenging. My phone is easier. It gives me instant rewards. But when I put it down, I don't feel good about it. I feel worse. And I think that pattern, that cycle size, is probably true for a lot of people, maybe even you. And it's a big part of the larger picture when we try to understand why so few people read anymore. What we're seeing now is this split. There are the super readers, people who fly through dozens of books a year, and they keep the average numbers looking good. But at the same time, there's a growing number of people who've decided that reading just isn't for them. And honestly, I don't know exactly how we fix that, but that's where we're at.